Welcome to the DisabiliTEA, a podcast where we have candid discussions about all things related to disability. Short-term, long-term, financial claims, impact on other areas of life, causes in the workplace, and more. With your host, attorney Anjel Burgess. You can find this show at www.disabilityhelpline.com and on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now here's the host of the DisabiliTEA, Anjel Burgess.
Hello and welcome to the DisabiliTEA. We are so happy to have a very special guest with us today, attorney Heather Nadler of the law firm Nadler here in Georgia. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, we are so excited to talk with you today about a topic that I get a lot of calls about, and that is special needs trusts. But before we dive into that topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about your practice and yourself?
Sure. Well, my name is Heather Nadler. I am an attorney here in Georgia with my law firm Nadler. We practice exclusively in the areas of elder and special needs law. At their heart, elder and special needs law are very much like a trust and estates practice. It's just that we have a closer concentration and more of a fine tune toward our practice, which involves assisting individuals with disabilities or individuals as they are aging. Personally, I am an Atlanta native, went to Auburn for undergrad, Tulane University for my law degree. I've been practicing over 20 years now, which is kind of hard to believe.
Time flies.
Yes.
Well, I'm really excited that you're here because I get a lot of calls from people asking about special needs trusts. So can you tell us, just let's dive right in. What is a special needs trust?
Right. One of my hokey sayings is, what's so special about a special needs trust? So special needs trusts are designed for people who have disabilities, and the primary purposes behind them are really twofold. One of them is just making sure that there is appropriate financial management over the assets that are going to be held for the benefit of the person with a disability, known as our beneficiary. So that's kind of one mission behind a special needs trust. The second mission, and the one that a lot of times gets people into my office, maybe they haven't really thought about, oh yeah, we need some financial oversight as well, but it's all about keeping eligibility for public benefits. In particular, benefits that are means tested. Those are supplemental security income and Medicaid benefits. So by having assets encapsulated in a special needs trust, they don't count as resources when entities like Social Security or Medicaid are looking to determine if someone is eligible. Sure, this person might have a disability, but do they meet the financial eligibility criteria? And if you just see a regular old trust, typically like what a parent might set up for a child under a last will and testament, it's going to say use this money for the maintenance, education, health, and support of the beneficiary. I always say that word support is a 4-letter word when it comes to needing means tested benefits. What you want to see is that the money in the trust is directed to be used to supplement the beneficiary. Let the beneficiary look first to the benefits that are available, in particular means tested benefits, anything from Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and then after taking into consideration what the beneficiary can get under those programs, then let's look and see, all right, they need something else. Great, let's use the trust to pay for it. But that's why the special needs trust, quote unquote, works to not mess up benefits.
Okay, so I know the context that I see a need for a special needs trust quite often is when someone is going to apply for SSI, and of course they've got these assets. Typically I see it in the context of perhaps a family who has a young adult that's getting ready to turn 18 and apply for SSI, and there are some, funds in a bank account, there may be some property or some other type of asset, which would ordinarily disqualify this individual for SSI. So my question to you is for families in that situation where they know from the outset, okay, there's some assets here. Um, who who can get the special needs trust? If can mom and dad get one for their son or daughter, or does the son and daughter have to get their own special needs trust?
Yes, well, I'll give you my very lawyerly answer of it depends. But one of the key words that I liked that you were using there was from the outset, like, okay, we know. Because sometimes there is uncertainty and we don't know, if someone has a disability, maybe they're on the autism spectrum disorder, we don't know going forward, is this going to be a lifelong disability or is there going to be progression? But in an instance where we know someone has a developmental delay, for instance, that's not going to improve to the point that they can ever be self-supporting. And so they're going to need the help of conscientious loved ones who do this planning ahead of time. So to answer your question, suppose we had a young person, oftentimes it's just a baby. Some parents are really on it. And it's just a baby. And they know that they want to get something set up for this child. You can get the trust set up from the get-go. So mom and dad could create the special needs trust, and then it's available. It's always, in a lot of ways, just a bank account with a fancy name. Maybe the grandparents want a place to make gifts, aunts and uncles, we just want to have some money stashed away. Whereas you would tend to think, oh, well, my child has a disability, don't give them anything because I've heard about these benefits and we don't want to mess up the benefits. So don't gift directly to the child, but yes, mom and dad can go out, get a special needs trust. That's what's known as a third party special needs trust. It can be set up and be available then to accept gifts. And then it also works well as part of the parent's estate plan down the road. When the parents pass away, we can also direct any inheritance to that trust. So parents planning ahead of time absolutely can get the trust set up.
So even when there's, little to no money to actually fund the trust, it's okay to go ahead and set it up with, the anticipation that, one day there will be funds to place in the trust.
Yes. And so you can set that trust up, and then it becomes part, and maybe it gets funded, maybe it doesn't, and or it just kind of hangs out. But by having it created, you can go ahead and name it as the beneficiary on life insurance policies or the beneficiary on retirement accounts. A lot of times younger families don't have a whole lot. It might be newlyweds who have a baby now that say has Down syndrome and they want to have this planning in place. Just because they don't have anything right now, you can get that framework in place, because if you think about it, oh, well, yeah, if I died, I'd have a few $100,000 in life insurance.
Right.
So you want to get that set up, and life insurance can be a great way to go about providing for a loved one that way.
Okay. So once that trust is set up, then, using your example of a life insurance policy, if I wanted to go and establish a policy, normally what I may do is say, okay, well, I want my minor child to be the beneficiary, right? So you're saying as long as that special needs trust is set up, I could instead make the trust the beneficiary and the money would go directly to the trust?
Yes, that is correct. So a lot of times for a family, you might have your spouse first, but then the contingent beneficiary. And if you've got 3 children, well, each of the children gets their own trust potentially. If the child's under the age of 18, any child, we don't necessarily want to have $100,000 when they turn 18. So those children might have a trust named as well. But then, yes, for the child with a disability, you're going to say special needs trust for, Joe Smith as your beneficiary.
Okay, wonderful. So for families where maybe there is no advanced planning, and you're in the situation where, let's say, this young adult is involved in a car accident and receives a settlement, what happens then in terms of being able to utilize a special needs trust? Can that young adult still get a special needs trust at that point?
Yes. So what you are referring to there is a different type of special needs trust known as a first party special needs trust. A third party special needs trust is funded with other people's money, mom, dad, grandparents wanting to leave an inheritance or make gifts. On the flip side of the coin, a first party special needs trust is funded with my money. If it's for me, it's my money. So maybe in the example you gave, I got into a car accident. And so then, yes, and maybe I'm significantly injured from this car accident, or like Anjel would see in work, a Social Security disability claim, or a workers' comp injury, where you get injured later in life. And up until then, you didn't need benefits. You weren't worried about that. But now things have changed drastically. And so someone does need benefits, and you think, well, shoot, I've got these assets. Right. As long as the person is under the age of 65, assets can be placed into a first party special needs trust. Essentially, Medicaid, Social Security will say, all right, we're going to let you do this. We're going to let you take your assets and put them into a trust and then get our benefits. But when you pass away, we, Medicaid, not Social Security doesn't get paid back, but when the person passes away, it's kind of the catch that if there is money remaining in that trust, then Medicaid gets paid back. But Medicaid payback is not the end of the world. If we get billed $500 for a procedure, Medicaid might pay $7.83 for that procedure to take place. So if later on down the road, 25 years from now, we have to reimburse Medicaid the $7.83 that we would have had to pay $500 for initially and haven't had to pay any interest on over the past 25 years, Medicaid payback is not the end of the world. Of course, most people would like to avoid it. And in certain circumstances, you can, where you're planning ahead and making a gift. But something like a workplace injury or a car accident, we can't plan for that. Also, someone might inherit, and where someone didn't do the planning or didn't realize, grandparents think they're doing a wonderful thing by leaving money to the beneficiary, and then the beneficiaries come into my office, panic, the parents or the beneficiary, saying, I inherited this money and I can't have it. As long as you're under 65, the person themselves with the disability can establish the trust for themselves, this first party trust, or if that person has ever signed a power of attorney, the agent under a power of attorney can assign it. A parent or a grandparent can execute the trust document, or if we have a court-appointed guardian or conservator, they can get permission from the court to establish it. So the key thing there is, as long as the beneficiary is under the age of 65, even if the planning hasn't been done ahead of time, or it was a circumstance where that just didn't allow for future planning, you can do that cleanup, as we tend to call it in the office sometimes.
Okay. And so that Medicaid, the obligation to repay Medicaid, does that obligation exist despite the type of special needs trust, whether it's a first party or a third party?
It does not. So it's only with a first party trust. When I take my own money or money that I'm entitled to from a car accident or an inheritance or something and put it into a trust, then you have to have the Medicaid payback. Okay. But if the planning was done ahead of time, like mom and dad setting up the trust for a child with a disability, when the child with a disability passes away, anything that remains in that trust goes wherever the person who set it up says. It doesn't have to go to pay Medicaid back.
All right. Well, that's helpful to know. One of the other questions that I tend to get a lot, when I'm trying to help people with their disability claims, and we're trying to get SSI, and the parents know, okay, yes, there is a trust, right? And I say, okay, is it a special needs trust? And they say, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Is there a quick and easy way that as parents or family members that they can, look at the documents and be able to figure out whether they have a special needs trust or just a regular trust?
Mm-hmm. Really, the magic language is going to be, oftentimes you hear a special needs trust called a supplemental needs trust, and those terms are pretty interchangeable. And I kind of like the term supplemental because you can visualize that, like this money is to supplement the beneficiary. So typically, if you see any discussion within that, within the trust of supplement and not support, that's going to be an indicator that you got a special needs trust. Sometimes it might not be as, that one's pretty much a never say never, but that's going to be a slam dunk. If your trust says supplement, not support, it's like, yes, this got it. Now, sometimes you see a trust that doesn't necessarily say it that definitively, but it says taking into consideration benefits that are available, or taking into consideration my child's disability. So if you see language like that, it might be a little wishy-washy, but usually we can work with it.
Okay.
And convince the powers that be that is a special needs trust. But really the key language is going to be use this money to supplement the beneficiary.
Okay. And once there's a trust, so let's say that, yes, this individual has been approved for SSI, and now Social Security is saying, wait a minute, do you have assets? We think that you have assets. What kind of proof needs to be submitted to show Social Security or any other agency that, yes, I have a special needs trust? It's a trust to supplement. It's not one of the regular trusts that is accountable resource.
So when we set up a trust, we typically do that on behalf of our clients, and we send it to the Social Security Administration saying that this is a special needs trust. We will cite the relevant section of the Social Security manual, direct the caseworker right there. It's a 9-point checklist that Social Security wants to see satisfied. So just recognizing that, okay, here, bullet point, and addressing that. So, and also just not being intimidated if someone says no. If you know that you had a special needs trust done and someone says no, that's when you need to call Burgess and Christensen, or you need to call us and say, we know this is a special needs trust. So, because a lot of times the caseworkers, as much as we feel like in our world, well, gosh, these are everywhere. Don't they see these all the time? They really don't. So, not being afraid to say, well, wait a second, take another look at that, or, getting some help on that. When you apply for Medicaid, you disclose the trust to the Georgia Department of Community Health, and they have an approval process. And so they're going to look as well to make sure that you've got the appropriate language in there and that the trust. And then on an ongoing basis, as a trustee of a trust, the trustee needs to be able to operate the trust properly, because just because it's drafted properly, if the trustee is doing things like, giving the beneficiary thousands of dollars every month to plop into the old bank account, that's not going to work. There's some rules that have to be followed, not only on the front end, but going forward.
Okay. All right. So with the special needs trust, let's take this from the side of another attorney, or from the viewpoint of another attorney. So kind of stepping away for a moment from the family and, the use of the special needs trust for a family member. But let's say, we've got other attorneys that listen to the podcast, and they have clients who have been, involved in, automobile accidents or work-related accidents, and they don't anticipate being able to return to the workforce, right? So there's this settlement that they know is coming. Is a special needs trust a tool that they can use to help their client, in anticipation of the settlement?
Yes, absolutely. And it can be, and it should be. It should at least be considered in looking, because there have been cases where attorneys have been found liable themselves for just taking the net proceeds that their client was entitled to and handing it over, and not ever mentioning to their client, oh, you're on Medicaid, you need to look into the special needs trust thing, or you might lose some of your benefits by virtue of receiving this. So oftentimes it's helpful as a special needs attorney to be brought in early in the conversation. There are cases that I got brought in on 3 years ago just for the initial assessment. Nothing's happened yet, or I mean, stuff has happened. I don't know about it. Mediations and stuff. Nothing has settled yet.
Right.
And so things are going on. So it's definitely preferable to bring someone in early on in the conversation. It might not be a special needs trust. It might just be a settlement protection trust. Maybe this person, is still able to work some, but has some vulnerabilities where there's a risk of this money being squandered or lost, or family members coming out of the woodwork who want it. So, it could be a special needs trust or any other type of trust that can provide that protection.
Okay, so that's good to know. So, for attorneys that have clients who are specifically in situations maybe where there's a more catastrophic type of injury or a more permanent type of injury, one of the things that they then should consider is talking with, you about special needs trusts and, if it can potentially benefit a client that, they think otherwise might need to go on SSI as a result of their injuries.
Yes, because even with a very nice settlement, they're called settlements for a reason. You're very rarely made whole.
Right.
And so there's probably going to be a gap in the planning somewhere. And a lot of times Medicaid, Social Security, SSI can step in and help fill that gap and make your client's money go a lot further.
Okay. Well, that is really good information to know, both from the side of a family member and, from the side of an attorney representing clients in other areas. Are there any tools or tips that you would like for our audience to know about special needs trusts?
Ooh, special needs tips. I think one of the main things is people seem to not be aware, if they haven't gotten good advice on the front end, about these annual accountings. And that once you have a special needs trust, typically Social Security doesn't ask too much, doesn't require ongoing oversight and management of the trust. However, the Georgia Department of Community Health in particular, and many state Medicaid agencies across the country do require accountings. And they do require you to disclose the trust when it first gets set up, and to file an accounting every year of here's what came in and here's what went out. It doesn't have to be, something prepared by a CPA that's super fancy. But because if the trust is not being administered properly, you're jeopardizing benefits that way as well. And it's better to keep those accountings up to date so that you find that out and don't find yourself in a position where there's been a huge overpayment and you owe money back. I know we'll have you do a segment on that one. So I would say just recognizing that, just getting this piece of paper set up and a bank account opened is not enough. There are some ongoing responsibilities, and that should be taken into consideration when determining who your trustee is going to be. Is it just going to be, your sibling because they live next door and it's easy? Well, do they understand about getting tax returns filed and accountings with Department of Community Health? So there is some work, and you need to make sure you've got a good trustee appointed for that.
And, with the complexities involved and the things that you've described surrounding a special needs trust, in order to get one, do you have to work with an attorney? Sounds like you should.
I would say that you should. It's interesting because a lot of work that we do in our practice too is we do a lot of guardianships, we do a lot of special needs trusts, speak on both these topics all the time. And when people will ask about guardianship, do we need an attorney to do that? And I always say, you know what, if you're picking between the guardianship and the special needs trust assistance, the probate courts are set up to be user-friendly and to get that process done on your own. But please don't print a special needs trust off the internet, because it's a lot more than just the piece of paper. It's making sure the right provisions go into the trust. It's making sure you have all the discussions surrounding the benefits and the trustee and what it is you want the trust to do and not do. So I would definitely say special needs trusts are a don't try this at home situation.
Agree. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for talking with us about special needs trusts. I think that, this will provide a lot of good, useful information to families that have questions about it. or other attorneys who have clients who this may benefit. So please let us know how we can contact you, we being our viewers and listeners, with any questions about special needs trusts.
Well, great. Well, thank you for asking. Our firm is Nadler Biernath. Our website is www.nadlerbiernath.com. And just to spell that for you, Nadler, B is in boy, IER, N is in Nancy, ATH.com. And our office telephone number is 770-455-0535. Also, if you go to our website, there is an opportunity to submit an online inquiry to go through that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Attorney Heather Nadler, for joining us this afternoon on this episode of the DisabiliTEA. This podcast can be viewed on YouTube. It's also available on several other audio formats, including Spotify and Apple Music. We are looking forward to bringing you another dynamic expert who can talk with you about other issues surrounding disabilities. So from myself and the DisabiliTEA broadcast, we will see you soon. Thank you.
You've been listening to the DisabiliTEA with Anjel Burgess. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others. You can catch prior episodes at www.disabilityhelpline.com and on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.